Let me begin by saying Iran was really interested in nuclear questions at the time of the Shah. And he started a very large program. And indeed, the Shah was responsible for articulating a 20 civil power reactor objective, which has now been readopted by the revolutionary government, so-called. The Shah went ahead. I think there were many of us who had suspicions that the Shah, much as Brazil, South Korea, Taiwan in those days, was interested in things beyond the civil program. But out of deference to the Shah and his position in the world and his influence, I think we asked fewer questions than we should have. When the revolution came, interestingly enough, the new regime called it off. The new regime has had a fairly firm policy that bombs like this are un-Islamic. And interestingly enough, the supreme leader, Khamenei, within the last 5 days has repeated that particular fatwa, as they call it, which at the moment appears to be, from his perspective, a binding attribute of Iranian policy. After the Iraqi attack against Iran in the early 80s and the long 8-year war, we saw evidence that the Iranians began again to look at their nuclear program. And by the 1990s, we had not only had a dispute about a reactor they bought from Germany, which we succeeded in having Germany cancel, but at the same time they moved over to the Russians to build the reactor. The Russians have a common policy that they will build reactors overseas, but only on the basis they provide the fuel and take back the spent fuel. And reactors, of course, produce plutonium in the spent fuel, and so it's extremely important that the spent fuel route, so to speak, to a nuclear weapon, at least with respect to the Bushehr reactor, has been closed off by the Russian policy. At the same time that that happened, Iran began to be very interested in enrichment. And enrichment of uranium is, of course, important for civil power reactors, but it requires a very low level of enrichment, 3.5% to 5%. Any enrichment level above that begins to be suspicious because it begins to point toward moving to 90% or so, which makes uranium capable of being fissioned in a bomb. And so we became very worried about that. At the same time, in the late 1990s, it was quite clear that at least some Iranians, in whatever form that was to happen, made a deal with Mr. A.Q. Khan from Pakistan and bought, according to the description of a friend of mine from Iran, container loads of material. His view was an Iranian view that they didn't even know what they got, but they paid a lot of money for it. And it turned out, of course, they got things that helped them improve their enrichment program. They got apparently at least a schematic plan for a nuclear weapon that appears to have Chinese origins. And maybe they got other things that we don't know about. That particular set of efforts went ahead until 2003. I'll lead you to judge what happened in 2003. But in 2003, apparently they made a conscious decision not to do things that would, in effect, constitute a program to make nuclear weapons.